After my husband's funeral, the two children I had dedicated my life to drove me down a dusty Georgia road and abandoned me. They had a forged will and a $4.5 million deal with developers to sell our family home and business. The legacy my husband and I had built from scratch. Hello, my dears. Come on in, have a seat. Welcome to Secrets from Grandma's Chest, the place where we share the kind of wisdom that only comes from a life fully lived. Before I begin, let me just thank you for being here with us. Go on and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and maybe I'll give you a little shout out next time. Today, I want to give a special hello to Sister Agnes all the way over in London, England. Thank you for being a part of our family, dear. Now, you listen close, because the story I'm about to tell you is a bitter truth. My name is Martha Rose Washington. I became Martha Washington when I married my James, my Big Jim, back in '79, and I stayed that way right up until 5 weeks ago. I am 73 years old, and these hands, though wrinkled and spotted with age, they still know how to bake the best sweet potato pie in the county, the kind my daughter Charisse used to love. They still know how to clean a fish, just like I taught my son Marcus when he was just a boy. I tell you this so you'll understand. Before it all fell apart, I was just a matriarch, a grandmother who thought she had raised her children right. Big Jim fought a war with his kidneys for a year and a half. It's the kind of sickness that eats you slow, that gives you time to say your goodbyes, but never enough time to truly let go. We kept it quiet, just between us. Our children, you see, were living their own busy, important lives up in Atlanta. Charisse, with her trendy fashion boutique that always seemed to be in need of an emergency cash infusion from her daddy. And Marcus, with his ever-shifting dreams of being a music producer, dreams that never quite took off but always required another seed investment from us. They don't need this worry on their minds right now, Jim would whisper from his armchair, his voice thin but firm. Let 'em live their lives, Martha. And I'd agree because I loved that man down to his very bones, and his peace was my peace. But I should have been smarter. I should have paid more attention to the people my children had become, not the children I remembered. That truth hit me hard when they finally did drive down to our home in rural Georgia, the home they grew up in, the place where Jim and I had built our nursery, Washington roots and blooms from nothing. We started with a tiny ramshackle greenhouse and a dream. Over 40 years, through sweat and prayer, we turned it into the most respected nursery in 3 counties, a symbol of our labor, a testament to Black ownership, in a place that didn't always make that easy. They didn't come to comfort their dying father. They came with questions about money. Mama, I'm just being practical, Charisse said, her voice dripping with that sickly sweet tone she'd learned from her wealthy Atlanta friends. We were sitting in the living room, the comforting scent of Jim's medicinal tea in the air, while he slept fitfully upstairs. These medical bills must be astronomical. Have you and Daddy thought about selling this old place? Her, the same girl who couldn't wait to escape to Atlanta at 19 because small-town life was too boring, was suddenly taking a keen interest in the business she had been embarrassed by all through high school. She saw not a legacy, but a price tag. I saw not a concerned daughter, but a vulture circling. Charisse's cold, practical words hung in the air of my living room, a chilling fog that extinguished the last of my denial. I looked at my daughter. her face a mask of practiced concern, and I saw a stranger. This was not the little girl whose scraped knees I had kissed, but a woman who looked at her dying father's legacy and saw only a dollar amount. I simply shook my head, unable to form a reply, and went upstairs to sit with my husband. The conversation, for me, was over. 2 days later, Marcus arrived. He pulled up in a sleek, black luxury sedan that hummed with a quiet power I knew for a fact he could not afford. It was a car that screamed of success, a carefully crafted illusion funded by a decade of his father's seed money for 6 failed ventures. He stepped out, dressed in a designer suit, looking every bit the successful music mogul he so desperately wanted to be. But when he came inside and saw his father, frail and sleeping in the hospital bed we had set up in the living room, the facade of the big shot melted away. He sat by his father's side for hours, his usual restless energy gone, replaced by a heavy, somber quiet. He held Jim's frail, trembling hand in his own, and as the evening light faded, he pulled the old family Bible from the bookshelf and began to read the 23rd Psalm, his voice low and steady. I sat in the corner, my heart a tangle of confusion. How could this be the same young man who was complicit in his sister's greedy, cold-hearted plan? How could such a capacity for tenderness exist alongside such a capacity for betrayal? It was a puzzle I could not solve, a contradiction that gave me a foolish, dangerous sliver of hope. Big Jim passed away in the pre-dawn hours of the next morning, a quiet and peaceful end to a long and honorable life. He went in his sleep, his hand still resting in mine. The homegoing service, as we call it, was just as Jim would have wanted. The church was filled not with powerful people, but with good people. The farmers, the church deacons, the families who had been buying their seeds and flowers from our nursery for generations. Reverend Davis spoke of Jim's deep love for the earth, of his integrity, of his belief that a man's worth was measured by what he grew with his own 2 hands. I stood between my children, a grieving widow flanked by 2 enigmas. Sharice's hand on my shoulder was a gesture of perfect public sympathy, but her touch was as cold and foreign as a stranger's. Marcus, however, wept. He cried with the raw, shuddering sobs of a man truly heartbroken, his face buried in his hands. Watching his genuine tears, I felt my heart ache for him, for the little boy who had just lost his father. I let myself believe that Sharice was the problem, that Marcus, in his grief, would surely come to his senses and honor his father's memory. Back at the house, our community wrapped us in a warm blanket of support. The kitchen counters overflowed with casseroles, fried chicken, and sweet potato pies. The air was filled with the low murmur of shared stories, of people remembering Jim's kindness, his booming laugh, his generosity. But amidst the warmth, I felt a profound chill of isolation. No one mentioned Sharice or Marcus taking over the nursery. No one spoke of them carrying on their father's legacy, because everyone in that room knew the truth. They were city children who had long since shed their country roots. They had forgotten everything their father had tried to teach them about hard work, about community, about the sacred duty of tending to the land. That evening, after the last of the mourners had departed, leaving behind a house heavy with the scent of lilies and the silence of loss, my children called for a family meeting at the kitchen table, the same table where I had helped them with their homework, where we had shared thousands of meals, was now the stage for the final act of their betrayal. "Daddy spoke to me last month," Sharice began, her eyes fixed on a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. He was worried about you, Mama. Worried you wouldn't be able to manage the business on your own. He wanted to make sure things were taken care of. She slid a sheaf of papers across the table. It was not the familiar cream-colored stationery of our family lawyer, Brother Franklin Hayes. It was crisp, white paper printed with the trendy, minimalist letterhead of her Atlanta boutique. It was some kind of legal document, a power of attorney or a revised will. And at the bottom, there was a signature, James Washington. My eyes narrowed. I had held my husband's hand for the last 6 months of his life. I knew the weak, trembling scrawl his signature had become due to the ravages of his illness and the heavy medications. This signature was neat, firm, and confident. It was a forgery, and a clumsy one at that. A rage so pure and so hot it almost choked me, rose in my chest. It was the rage of a mother bear whose cubs are threatened, the rage of a wife whose beloved husband's memory was being desecrated. You made him sign this, I said, my voice a low, dangerous growl. You put this in front of him when he was sick and confused and his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't even hold a fork. It was for the best, Marcus mumbled, finally looking at me, his eyes still red-rimmed from his tears at the funeral. The contradiction of it made me feel insane. They laid it all out. A development company was offering $4.5 million in cash for our land, our home, our legacy. They wanted to tear it all down and build a soulless concrete strip mall. A fresh start, Mama, Marcus said, his eyes now gleaming with a greedy light that extinguished all my remaining hope. We could all get a fresh start. A fresh start. As if the 40 years of love and labor Jim and I had poured into that soil were something to be bulldozed and forgotten. Your father would have never sold this land to those vulture developers, I said, my voice trembling with anger. He loved this place, and I will not agree to it. Charisse leaned back in her chair, a small cold smile on her lips. That's the thing, Mama, she said, her voice dropping the last of its sweet pretense. You don't have to agree. According to this, Daddy's will, the house and the business were only in his name. It all passes to us. The words hung in the air of my kitchen, a final brutal testament to their betrayal. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a declaration of ownership. They had not just come to claim their inheritance. They had come to erase mine. And as I looked at their hard, greedy faces, I finally understood. The vultures were no longer circling. They had landed. The silence that fell over the kitchen table was a tangible thing, a cold, heavy blanket that smothered the last 40 years of my life. I looked at the two strangers sitting before me, their faces flush with a greedy, triumphant light. These were not the children I had raised. They were invaders, conquerors who had breached the walls of my home and were now claiming it as their own. The love and hope I had felt just moments before, seeing Marcus's tears at the funeral, curdled into a cold, hard knot of understanding in the pit of my stomach. His tears were not for his father, they were for himself. A performance of grief to justify the monstrous act he was about to commit. I did not scream. I did not rage. A profound and chilling calm settled over me, the kind of clarity that comes only when you have truly hit rock bottom and have nothing left to lose. I looked from Charisse's hard, predatory smile to Marcus's weak, downcast eyes, and I saw the entirety of their conspiracy laid bare. This was not a sudden impulse. This had been planned. The visits, the concerned calls about Daddy's health, the questions about the business, it was all a lie. A long, calculated campaign to secure their inheritance. I see, I said, my voice quiet, devoid of the emotion they had expected. I rose slowly from the table, my movements deliberate. I'm very tired, I'm going to bed. I left them sitting there, their victory speech cut short, and walked up the stairs to the bedroom I had shared with my husband for a lifetime. I could feel their confused, irritated eyes on my back. My lack of a hysterical reaction had unnerved them, had robbed them of the dramatic scene they had clearly anticipated. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark, in the armchair by the window where Jim used to read, and I grieved. I grieved not just for my husband, but for my children. I mourned the loss of the sweet, laughing girl who loved my pies and the kind, gentle boy who loved to fish. Those children were well and truly dead, and in their place were these two cold, avaricious strangers. And as I grieved, I began to think. My mind, once clouded with sorrow, became as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. I thought of my grandmother, a formidable woman who had bought her own freedom and her own land with the money she had earned scrubbing other people's floors. I thought of the legacy she had passed down to me, a secret weapon hidden in plain sight. I came downstairs the next morning to find them waiting for me in the foyer. They were eerily cheerful, their faces bright with a false, solicitous concern that was more terrifying than their open greet of the night before. By the front door was a small, worn suitcase, my old overnight bag. "We packed a few things for you, Mama," Marcus said, that sickeningly sweet tone back in his voice. He refused to meet my eyes. "We found the most wonderful place for you," Charisse chirped, her smile a brittle, perfect lie. "A retirement community called Sunset Manor. It has a garden club and everything. We're going to take you for a tour today so you can see it and get settled in." They were treating me like a child, like a piece of old furniture to be moved and stored. I knew there was no Sunset Manor. I knew this was the final act of their betrayal, and I knew I had one last desperate chance to save myself. I allowed my face to crumple into a mask of frail, confused compliance. "Oh," I said, my voice a weak, trembling whisper. "Oh, that's very thoughtful of you, dear. Just let me go upstairs and get my heart medication from the bathroom. My old hands are so shaky these days, I'll need a moment to make sure I have the right pills." "Of course, Mama," Charisse said, barely concealing her impatience. "Take your time." That was the only opening I needed. I turned and walked slowly, deliberately, up the stairs, my hand shaking on the banister to complete the performance. The moment I was out of their sight, I moved with a speed and purpose that would have shocked them. I went not to the bathroom, but to the back of the deep, cedar-lined closet I had shared with Jim. Behind his old work shirts, which still smelled faintly of him and the good, clean earth, I felt for the loose floorboard. I lifted it and pulled out a small, heavy, tin-plated metal box. Then I went to our bathroom. I swung the large, mirrored medicine cabinet open. Behind it, in a small, hollow space in the wall that Jim had built for me decades ago, was our secret safe. Inside was not money, but our lives on paper. I took my passport, my birth certificate, and a few other crucial documents. I slipped them, along with the heavy metal box, into the bottom of my large, sturdy leather handbag underneath my wallet and my Bible. When I came back downstairs, my face was once again a mask of frail confusion. "I'm ready," I whispered. They hustled me out of the front door of the home I had built, the home I had loved without so much as a backward glance. The car ride was a silent, suffocating ordeal. I stared out the window, watching the familiar landmarks of my life, the church, the town square, the bridge over the river, pass by for what I knew would be the last time. Charisse drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Marcus stared out his passenger window, a coward to the very end. As I had expected, she bypassed the turnoff for the main highway and instead turned down a dusty, unpaved logging road, the car bumping and jostling over the ruts. Miles from anywhere, surrounded by nothing but dense pine forest and the hot, buzzing silence of the Georgia countryside, she pulled the car to a stop. She turned off the engine and looked at me, her eyes as cold and dead as a winter sky. "Get out, Mama," she said. "You'll only be in the way of the sale." Marcus, his face a miserable portrait of guilt, finally spoke, his voice a pathetic mumble. "I'm sorry, Mama. We just really, really need this money." I did not reply. I simply opened the car door and stepped out into the dust. Marcus got out and placed my small, useless suitcase on the ground beside me. They got back in the car. They did not say goodbye. They simply put the car in gear and drove away, leaving me standing in a swirling cloud of red Georgia dust. The dust settled. The sound of the engine faded. The profound silence of the countryside rushed in. They had left me for dead. A 73-year-old woman with a suitcase full of nightgowns, alone on a deserted road. They thought they had left me with nothing, but as I clutched the heavy handbag hanging from my shoulder, I felt the solid, reassuring weight of my grandmother's original deed, my passport, and my own quiet, unbreakable will to survive. They hadn't left me with nothing. They had left me with a weapon. And I was going to walk 10 miles to town to learn how to use it. The 10-mile walk to town was the longest and most important journey of my life. The Georgia sun beat down, hot and unforgiving, and the red dust of the country road billowed up around me, clinging to my clothes and my skin. With every step, my old, worn-out suitcase seemed to grow heavier. But I was not a frail 73-year-old woman on the verge of collapse. I was a pilgrim, and this dusty road was my sanctuary. The physical hardship was a crucible, burning away the last vestiges of the weeping, heartbroken victim I had been the night before. With each painful, determined step, the sorrow and shock were forged into a cold, hard, and unbreakable resolve. I thought of my grandmother, a sharecropper's daughter who had saved for 20 years to buy the 5 acres of land whose deed now rested in my handbag. I thought of my Jim, who had turned that land into a paradise with his own 2 hands. Their strength, their resilience flowed through me. By the time the dusty rooftops of my town appeared on the horizon, I was no longer grieving. I was a general, marching to war. I ignored the curious, concerned glances of my neighbors as I walked, disheveled and dust-covered, through the town square. My first stop was a small diner where the owner, a kind woman named Flo, took one look at my face and silently handed me a tall glass of iced water. I used the payphone on the wall, my fingers steady as I dropped the coins in and dialed the number I knew by heart. The office of Brother Franklin Hayes, our family lawyer for 40 years. His voice when he answered was a balm to my soul, a sound of sanity in a world gone mad, but it was laced with a frantic worry. "Martha Rose, thank the good Lord," he exclaimed, the relief palpable. "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. I was about to call the sheriff. Your children, they came to my office with the most outrageous, poorly forged document I have ever seen in my life. My suspicions were confirmed. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I was not alone. "I know, Franklin," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "and I have a story to tell you." I met him at his office 20 minutes later. It was a place of familiar comfort, smelling of old books and his pipe tobacco, the walls covered with photographs of local families he had served for decades. I told him everything. The scene at the kitchen table, the fake nursing home, the drive down the logging road, the abandonment. His face, usually so kind and gentle, hardened into a mask of cold professional fury. "This is not just a civil matter, Martha Rose," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is criminal, forgery, attempted fraud, and elder abuse. We can bring charges against them that could put them in prison." "First," I said, opening my large, sturdy handbag, "I want you to see this." I took out the small metal box and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was an old folded document. I handed him the original deed to the 5 acres of land, purchased by my grandmother in 1948, registered in my maiden name, Martha Rose Johnson. Brother Hayes, a man who loved the intricacies of property law, unfolded the document with the reverence of a historian examining a sacred text. He read it, then read it again. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. He began to chuckle, a low, rumbling sound that grew into a full-throated laugh of pure, unadulterated legal joy. "Oh, my," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "Oh, my, Martha Rose, this is not just a deed, this is a checkmate." He stood up and walked to the large property map hanging on his wall. "Do you see this, Martha?" he said, his finger tracing the lines of our land. "Their 20 acres, the land Jim bought in his name, is here. But your 5 acres, this parcel here, it contains the artesian well, the only source of viable water on the entire property. Without legal access to your land and your water rights, the rest of the nursery land is a dry, useless tract. Their $4.5 million deal with the developers is completely, utterly worthless." The weapon I had been carrying was more powerful than I had ever imagined. With my legal position now confirmed as an unassailable fortress, we began the counterattack. The plan was swift and decisive. My first call was to Deacon Miller, the president of our local community bank and a man who had served on the church board with Jim for 20 years. I told him the story. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with a horrified shock. "Consider it done, Sister Washington," he said, his voice grim. "All business accounts are frozen, effective immediately." My second call was to Sister Regina Jones, the sharp as a tack editor of the County Chronicle and the biggest gossip in 3 counties. I knew my children would try to spin a story of a grieving, confused mother. I was going to tell the truth first. I gave her the story, not as a piece of sordid family drama, but as a cautionary tale. Local Black-owned legacy threatened by corporate developers and family greed. As I sat in Brother Hayes' office, a sense of my own power returning to me with every passing minute, the phone on his desk rang. It was his secretary. "It's your daughter, Charisse, on the line for you, Mrs. Washington." she said. She sounds frantic. Brother Hayes looked at me, a gleam in his eye. He pressed the button on his speakerphone. Sharice's voice, shrill and panicked, filled the room. What have you done? The bank accounts are frozen. We can't access a single penny. What did you do, you old woman? I leaned forward and took the phone from its cradle, my voice as calm and cool as the water flowing from my grandmother's well. Sharice, I said, I believe you wanted a business meeting. I think it's time we had one. Your brother and you, in this office, tomorrow morning at 9, and I suggest you come prepared to listen. I hung up the phone, cutting off her sputtering, furious reply. The game had changed. The abandoned victim was now the one in charge, and I was about to dictate the terms of their unconditional surrender. The next morning, I was in Brother Hayes' office, a full hour before the scheduled 9 o'clock meeting. I was not dressed in the somber, dark colors of a grieving widow. I wore my Sunday best, a well-pressed, lavender-colored suit, a string of my mother's pearls, and a hat adorned with a single elegant white rose. I was not here as a victim. I was here as the matriarch of the Washington family, the guardian of my husband's legacy, and the sole owner of my grandmother's land. I sat not with a feeling of dread, but with a profound and righteous calm. Today I would take my life back. They arrived precisely at 9, looking as though they had been dragged through a storm. Sharice's expensive Atlanta chic was gone, replaced by a frantic, wild-eyed fury. Her hair was a mess, and dark circles stood out beneath her eyes. Marcus looked even worse. He was pale and drawn, his shoulders slumped in a posture of utter defeat, a man who had been stripped of his last illusion of control. They did not look like powerful business people. They looked like spoiled children who had been caught red-handed. They burst into the office, forgoing any pleasantries. Sharice immediately launched her attack. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You have no right to freeze those accounts. That is our inheritance. We have bills to pay, business expenses." Brother Hayes, who had been calmly sipping his morning coffee, placed his mug down with a deliberate, soft click. He gestured to the 2 chairs opposite his desk. "Please, have a seat," he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble that was somehow more intimidating than a shout. "Let's not start with hysterics. Let's start with the facts." He let them stew in a tense silence for a moment before he continued. "The accounts are frozen," he said, his eyes fixed on them, "because my client, Mrs. Martha Rose Washington, has presented me with credible, undeniable evidence of a conspiracy to commit fraud against her and against the estate of her late husband. The centerpiece of that evidence," he said, sliding a copy of the document they had given me across the desk, "is this pathetic, amateurishly forged will." "That document is perfectly legal," Sharice spat. "Daddy signed it." "Did he?" Brother Hayes asked, raising an eyebrow. "Did your father, in the last weeks of his life, when his hands were trembling so badly from medication that he could barely hold a spoon, suddenly develop the firm, steady penmanship of a 20-year-old? Because that is what a forensic handwriting expert will conclude, and that is what a jury will call perjury and fraud." Marcus seemed to shrink in his chair, but Sharice, ever the fighter, pressed on, believing she still held the winning hand. "That doesn't matter," she sneered. "The business, the primary asset, was solely in Daddy's name. Even with the old will, it passes to us as his next of kin. You have nothing." I chose that moment to make my move. I reached into my handbag, took out the heavy folded deed from my grandmother, and placed it gently on the center of the desk. It was the only object on the polished wood, a silent, powerful testament to a truth they had never known. "What is that?" Charisse asked, her voice full of contempt. "That," Brother Hayes said, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face, "is the original, notarized, and legally unimpeachable deed to the 5 acres of land registered to one Martha Rose Johnson, my client's maiden name. A document that predates her marriage to your father by 3 years. A document which, I might add, describes the parcel of land containing the only artesian well on the entire 30-acre property." He let the words sink in. I watched as the gears turned in their heads, as the full catastrophic implication of what he was saying dawned on them. "Without the whiter rights and legal access to the land described in that deed," Brother Hayes continued, his voice as smooth as silk, "the remaining 25 acres of the Washington Roots and Blooms nursery is, for all agricultural and developmental purposes, a dry, worthless patch of dirt. Your $4.5 million deal with the developers is, I'm afraid, dead. It is impossible without my client's signature, which she has no intention of providing." The color drained from Charisse's face. Marcus let out a low groan and put his head in his hands. Their entire elaborate plan, their future built on a foundation of greed and deceit, had just evaporated. They had been completely and utterly checkmated. Just as they were reeling from this fatal blow, Brother Hayes's desk phone rang. He looked at me and winked before pressing the speakerphone button. "Ah, Joseph, thank you for calling me back so promptly." A deep, powerful voice, a voice that commanded respect, filled the room. "Franklin, my pleasure. I've just gotten off the phone with the CEO of the development group. It seems we have a mutual interest in seeing them behave honorably." "This is Joseph Dubois," I said quietly to my children, who were staring at the phone in horror. "A very old and dear friend of your father's." I explained to the developers, Mr. Dubois' voice boomed from the speaker, that the Washington property was not, in fact, for sale. I also reminded them of our last business dealing, which was rather unpleasant for them. I then informed them that if they pursued any kind of legal action against Mrs. Washington, I would be forced to use my considerable influence to ensure their next 5 years of zoning applications would be a bureaucratic nightmare. He paused. "They have agreed to withdraw their offer. However, they are now considering a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the parties who fraudulently misrepresented their ownership of the property in the first place. That would be you, Charisse and Marcus." That was it, the final, crushing blow. They were not just losing the $4.5 million. They were now facing a massive lawsuit from a powerful corporation and the very real threat of criminal charges for forgery, fraud, and elder abuse from their own mother. They were trapped with absolutely no way out. They looked at me, their faces masks of pure primal terror. The greedy vultures who had come to pick my life apart were now caught in a cage of their own making, a cage I had so quietly and patiently built around them. The fight was over. It was time for the sentencing. And I, the judge they had so casually and cruelly dismissed, was about to read it to them. Charisse and Marcus stared at me, their faces hollow masks of terror. The complex, multi-layered trap had sprung, and they were caught fast with no hope of escape. The threat of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit from a powerful corporation was a nightmare beyond their comprehension, and the looming specter of criminal charges, fraud, forgery, elder abuse, was a terrifying, life-altering reality. The greedy, confident children who had laughed at me in my own kitchen were gone, replaced by two cornered, desperate people who were finally, for the first time in their lives, about to face the consequences of their actions. I let them stew in the thick, panicked silence for a long moment. I watched as the full, catastrophic weight of their situation settled upon them. Charisse, who had always been so composed, so in control, was visibly trembling, her knuckles white as she gripped the arms of her chair. Marcus had his head in his hands again, muttering, oh God, over and over. Finally I spoke. My voice was not the angry roar of a victor, nor the gloating tone of a woman enjoying her revenge. It was the calm, quiet, and utterly final voice of a judge delivering a sentence. I believe we have reached the point where we can discuss the terms of your surrender, I said. Charisse's head snapped up. Surrender? She whispered, her voice a dry rasp. This is not a negotiation, I stated, my eyes meeting hers, and for the first time she did not look away with contempt but with fear. These are my terms. You will accept them in their entirety right here, right now, or I will stand down and I will let Mr. Dubois and the district attorney proceed as they see fit. The choice is yours. Brother Hayes slid a fresh legal document across the desk, its title printed in stark, bold letters: Renunciation of all claims and inheritance rights. Term 1, I said, you will both sign this document, which formally and irrevocably renounces any and all claims, present and future, to the estate of your father, James Washington, and to my estate. This includes the house, the business, all bank accounts, and all personal property. You are, as of this moment, formally and completely disinherited. Term 2, I continued, my voice unwavering. You will sign a formal written apology, not to me, to the memory of your father. In it, you will acknowledge your attempt to defraud his estate with a forged document and your conspiracy to sell his life's work against his known wishes. That document will be notarized and held in trust by Brother Hayes. Term 3, I said, delivering the final practical blow. You will return to the house under the supervision of an associate from this law firm. You will pack your personal belongings, your clothes, your toiletries, the things you brought with you from Atlanta. You will not take a single object that was purchased with your father's money or that belongs to this house. You will be out of the house by 5 o'clock this evening, and you will be out of this town by sunrise tomorrow. I never want to see either of you again. Charisse opened her mouth to speak, a last pathetic gasp of protest perhaps, but I cut her off. If you agree to these terms and sign these papers now, I said, offering my one and only act of mercy, I will not press criminal charges, and I will call Mr. Dubois and ask him, as a personal favor to me and to the memory of his friend, your father, to persuade the developers to drop their lawsuit against you. I am offering you a way to walk away from this with your freedom. It is the last gift a mother will ever give you. There was no fight left in them. The choice between disgrace and prison is no choice at all. With shaking hands and tears of self-pity streaming down their faces, they signed the papers, they signed away the house, they signed away the business, they signed away the last tenuous connection to the family they had so thoroughly destroyed. The scene at the house that afternoon was a quiet, somber affair. A young paralegal from Brother Hayes's office stood by, clipboard in hand, as Charisse and Marcus packed their bags. I did not go inside. I sat on the front porch swing, the one Jim had built for me on our 10th anniversary, and I watched. I felt no sadness. I felt no pity. I felt only a profound and weary sense of release, the feeling of a surgeon who has just completed a long and difficult operation to remove a sickness. They emerged from the house an hour later carrying their suitcases. They did not look at me. They loaded their bags into their expensive cars, the last vestiges of a life they had not earned and could no longer afford, and drove away down the long gravel driveway. I watched the taillights of their cars disappear over the hill, shrinking until they were two small red sparks, and then they were gone. A profound silence settled over Washington roots and blooms, a deep cleansing peace I hadn't felt since before Jim first got sick. The war was over. The legacy was safe. I had fought the vultures that had sprung from my own nest, and I had won. But as I stood alone in the doorway of the house that was now truly and completely mine, a house that felt both familiar and strangely new, I knew the work was not over. The land had been saved from the concrete and the greed. Now it was time to make it grow again. The morning after my children drove away, I woke to a world that was both achingly familiar and profoundly new. The light that streamed through my bedroom window seemed brighter, the air cleaner. The silence of the house was not the heavy, grief-stricken silence of the past few weeks, but a light, peaceful quiet pregnant with possibility. I brewed a pot of the chicory coffee that Jim had loved, but for the first time the aroma was not a sad reminder of what I had lost, but a comforting anchor to the life I was about to reclaim. I walked through every room of my home, opening the windows wide, letting the fresh morning air chase out the last lingering ghosts of their greed and betrayal. This was my home. The cleansing had begun. Later that day, I took a long, slow walk through the grounds of Washington Roots and Blooms. Jim's illness and the subsequent turmoil had taken their toll. Weeds were beginning to choke the rose bushes he had so carefully cultivated. The greenhouse glass was cloudy with the film of neglect. It was a physical manifestation of the state of our family legacy. Once beautiful and thriving, now overgrown with the sickness that needed to be rooted out. Looking at the work that needed to be done, I did not feel overwhelmed. I felt a surge of profound, energizing purpose. This was my land. This was my work now. I knew I could not do it alone. I was 73, and while my spirit was strong, my back was not what it used to be. The nursery needed more than a caretaker. It needed a visionary, someone with the energy and the knowledge to carry it into the future. I did not place an ad in the paper. I went to my community. I spoke with Reverend Davis after church service that Sunday. I told him I was looking for a new general manager, someone young, smart, with a love for the land and a connection to our town. He smiled, a knowing, gentle expression on his face. "Sister Washington," he said, "I believe the Lord has already sent you the perfect person." He told me about Imani, a young woman who had grown up in our church. She was the daughter of a family I'd known for years. She had earned a full scholarship to study horticulture at a top agricultural university, but after graduating with honors, she had been forced to take a corporate landscaping job up in Atlanta. because there were no opportunities for someone with her skills back home. I invited her to the nursery the next day. Imani was a brilliant young woman with bright, intelligent eyes and hands that, despite her corporate job, still had the faint, honest trace of soil under the nails. She walked through the nursery with me, and her love for the plants, her deep, intuitive understanding of the land, was palpable. She saw not just the neglect, but the potential. She spoke of introducing native plant species, of starting organic farming workshops, of building a community seed bank. She spoke Jim's language, the language of growth and sustainability. In her, I saw a reflection of the best of us, a daughter of the community with a brilliant mind and a servant's heart. I hired her on the spot, offering her a salary and a partnership stake that made her eyes fill with tears. With Imani at the helm, a whirlwind of new life and energy swept through the nursery. We did not just restore it, we resurrected it. The community, having read the story and the chronicle of how I had saved the land from the developers, rallied around us. Volunteers from the church helped us pull weeds and repair the greenhouses. Old customers returned, their loyalty a testament to the legacy Jim and I had built. We launched our first new initiative that spring, Little Sprouts, a free Saturday morning gardening program for local children. Soon, the nursery was filled with the sound I had been missing for so long, the sound of children's laughter. Seeing their small hands in the dirt, their faces alight with the wonder of planting a seed and watching it grow, began to heal a part of my heart I thought had been destroyed forever. My next act was to give Jim's memory a permanent, living home in the community he had loved. I used a portion of the nursery's now flourishing profits to establish the Big Jim Washington Agricultural Scholarship, a fund to help young people from our county pursue higher education in agriculture, horticulture, or environmental science. His name would now be synonymous not with loss, but with opportunity. As the sun set on that first year of my new life, I would often sit on my porch swing watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance over the fields. A profound sense of peace, one I thought I had lost forever, had settled deep in my bones. Washington Roots and Blooms was more than a business again. It was the beating heart of our community. My husband's name was honored. My home was a place of joy. But the past, I was about to be reminded, rarely stays buried forever. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. My heart gave a small, tired lurch. I knew with a mother's intuition that never truly dies who it was from. The ghost I thought I had banished was knocking at my door again. I sat on my porch swing, the familiar comforting creak of the chains a quiet rhythm in the evening air. The screen of my phone glowed, illuminating the message that had breached the peace of my new life. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but my heart knew the sender instantly. "Mama," it read, "it's Marcus. I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything. I think about what we did every single day. There is no excuse for it. I am so sorry for everything. Can we please just talk?" 5 years ago, a message like this would have sent a surge of hopeful maternal love through my veins. I would have called him back instantly, my heart aching with a desire to soothe his pain, to forgive, to fix what was broken. But the woman who would have done that, the mother who loved her children unconditionally, had been left for dead on a dusty road miles from here. She had died that day, and a different woman had walked back to town. I looked at the words on the screen. I am so sorry. How easily they came to him now that he was, I presumed, once again in need. I remembered his real tears at his father's funeral, shed just hours before he revealed the forged will. I remembered his pathetic, mumbled sorry as he drove away, leaving me in the dust. His apologies were not acts of remorse, they were tools, keys he used when he thought a lock needed picking. This was just another key, another attempt to see if the door to my heart and my wallet had been left unlocked. I did not feel anger. I did not feel a flicker of hatred. I felt nothing at all. He was a stranger, a ghost from a life that was no longer mine. With a quiet, steady thumb, I pressed and held his message. A small menu appeared on the screen. I selected block this number. Then I deleted the message. I watched as the little bubble of his text vanished from my screen, leaving no trace, no echo. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay ashes. I put my phone away and turned my attention back to the sunset. 5 more years have passed since that last deleted message. I am 83 now, and the seasons of my life are turning towards a gentle, peaceful winter. Washington roots and blooms has never been more vibrant. Imani, the brilliant young woman I hired, is now a full partner, managing the day-to-day operations with a skill and passion that would have made Jim's heart swell with pride. The Big Jim Washington Scholarship has sent 10 fine young people from our community to college to study the earth they love. Our Little Sprouts program is a town institution, and I still, on warm Saturday mornings, sit in the shade of a large oak tree and teach a new generation of children how to feel the magic in a tiny seed. My home is a place of peace, filled with the scent of baking pies and the sound of my old gospel records on the turntable. My new family is the community that surrounds me. The church members who check in on me, the families who buy their Christmas trees from us every year, the children who run to hug me when they see me in town. It is a family I chose, a family bound not by blood, but by mutual respect and shared love for this small patch of earth we call home. My own children never came back. I hear whispers now and then. Charisse, I'm told, lost her boutique and now lives somewhere in Florida, married to a man who does not know the dark story of her inheritance. Marcus works a low-level management job in another state, a quiet man living a quiet life of what I can only imagine is quiet regret. They are ghosts, echoes from another world. I do not hate them. I simply do not think of them. The mother who would have loved them no matter what truly did die on that dusty road. In her place, a woman who finally understood her own worth was born. And so, that is my story. The one I wanted to share with you from my cedar chest of memories. It's a story about land, about legacy, and about a betrayal that cut to the bone. But more than that, it's a story about strength. Perhaps some will listen and say that I was too harsh, that a mother's love should be unconditional. But you remember this, my child. Some people in this world mistake kindness for weakness. They see a giving heart as a well that will never run dry, and they learn far too late what real strength looks like. It is the strength of a woman who knows her own value, who protects what is hers, and who understands that the most important roots she will ever tend to are her own.